Well, greetings, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Rah. I am the host of today's panel entitled Digital Futures. I'm very fascinated by the intersection of digital art and performance. And our objective with our time today is to share some of the thinking about current issues in the field and what the future looks like for our sector. I'd like to start off by thanking our partners whose funding and support has made this event possible. The Canada Council for the Arts, the European Cultural Centre Italy, the European Cultural Centre Performance Art Program, and the Aabijijiwan Media Lab. With me on panel today are some exceptionally prolific cultural practitioners. We have Dr. Christiane, who is the Adjunct Curator of Digital Art at the Whitney Museum of American Art, as well as a professor in the School of Media Studies at the New School in New York. She is the recipient of the Thoma Foundation's 2016 Art Writing Award in Digital Art, the writer of several seminal books in digital art, and she's also responsible for Artport, the museum's portal for internet art. Next, we have Dr. Julie Nagam, who is the inaugural artistic director for the 2020 and 2022 Nuit Blanche Toronto and the Canada Research Chair. Dr. Nagam is currently the principal director of the multi-million-dollar partnership and development grant, The Space Between Us, collaborations within Indigenous, circumpolar, and Pacific places through digital media and design, which is a 7-year-long initiative. She is a collective member of GLAM, which works on curatorial activism, Indigenous methodologies, public art, digital technologies, and engagement with place. Dr. Nagam is also the director of the Aabijijiwan New Media Lab. Thanks, Julie, for being here. Next, we have Dr. Francesca Albrezzi, who is an art historian, curator, and digital humanist based in Los Angeles. She has worked with museums, including the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History in Washington, the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art in Paris, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and the Getty Research Institute, also in LA. She has garnered significant experience in developing and teaching digital tools for art historical practice and humanistic research, such as the Getty Scholars Workspace TM for conducting collaborative arts research and preservation. We also have Peggy Schoenegge, who's a curator and researcher based in Berlin, who focuses on media and digital art with a specific focus on performance, gender, and AI, artificial intelligence, working in both the virtual and physical world. She is the head of the board of the Media Art Association Berlin. Besides others, she's curated This Could Be You, Disembodiment in VR at Overkill Festival, and Immaterial Matter in Peer to Space's virtual art space. Peggy co-curated Peer to Space's exhibition Uncanny Conditions in Munich, Pandora and Vinci in Dusseldorf, and Speculative Species in Barcelona. And last but not least, we have Tina Sauerlaender, who is an art historian, curator, speaker, and writer. She focuses on the impact of the digital and the internet on individual environments and society, as well as on virtual reality and visual arts. She is the artistic director of the VR Art Prize by DKB in cooperation with CAA Berlin. With her independent exhibition platform, Peer to Space, she has been curating and organizing international group shows since 2010. She is the founder of SALOON, an international network for women working in art, which is active in over 10 cities. She is a PhD candidate at the University of Art and Design, Linz, Austria, and her research topic is artistic self-representation in digital art, and her dissertation exhibition is currently on view, performingidentities.net, and she will be telling us a little bit about that later today. This is an incredibly impressive group, and it's an honor to have you here with us today. So I'd like to start off with Christiane. In your writings, you put forth an important distinction of digital art as, quote, digital technologies that are used as a medium rather than as a production tool, end quote. And you identify a shift to the era of the post-digital, where artists are working in object-based mediums that are informed by network technologies. Can you elaborate on this distinction and when you think this shift occurred? Further, can you talk about other major considerations you've observed that have influenced female practitioners in digital art from the time you first wrote the original version of digital art in 2003 to your book, A Companion to Digital Art, 13 years later in 2016?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Rah, and thanks so much for having me, and to everyone for attending today. I'm going to quickly share my screen and get started with your question number one. I could answer that for several hours, of course. I would say that in digital art history, we have come kind of full circle, starting with the early pioneers and algorithmic computer drawings created by people who at the time couldn't output their work to the screen because computing power wasn't there yet. That doesn't mean that there weren't really interactive computer-driven work, such as robotic pieces by Edward Inatowicz, etc. But what we saw in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s was really experimentation with software, with game engines, with databases driving things. And then I would say at the beginning of the 21st century and around 2005, we saw once again a kind of material turn and shift to materialities, which you indicated. And younger artists started using digital technologies not simply as a production tool, which is happening anywhere today. Walk into any gallery and probably the photographs you see will be digital prints, but use the technologies as a medium in the production of an object. And that is the kind of post-digital practice that we're seeing a lot of today. So in the following, I want to highlight some examples of my practice that also connect to your questions. I have been curating the Artport website, as you mentioned, for by now 21 years. And one of the series on the site is Sunrise Sunset, which is an intervention into the whole website whitney.org, which is replaced for 30 seconds at sunrise and sunset time in New York by an artwork. And the work that is currently on view by Sarah Ludi, Tumbleweeds, is a good example of this connection of physical and virtual practice, and also performativity in particular. So what Sarah is doing is basically in her hometown in New Mexico, equipping tumbleweeds with glass shards she finds in the desert and tying them with biodegradable thread to them, and then creating a kind of map of that at sunrise and sunset, where you see these colored streaks representing the tumbleweeds with the little light reflections. And this is a continuously growing map as more tumbleweeds are released into the desert. And the tumbleweeds become a metaphor of our untethered state for the past couple of years. And the work itself is also very much connecting the digital and virtual space, or highlighting the disconnects between them. So that just as an example, and I want to talk a little bit more about Artport, highlighting some works. These are just going to be teasers. You can check them all out online. And I want to highlight some areas that I think will be digital futures or very prominent in the future. First of all, we cannot avoid talking about the much hyped Web3 built on the blockchain, or NFTs. So in 2018, we did a work with Jennifer and Kevin McCoy, who donated a film to the Whitney Museum, but then opened up an application for donorship of this work, which was tokenized. So 50 people selected became donors of the work to the Whitney Museum, playing with decentralization and opening up the donor space to people with less money. We have also done a few projects with AI, which once again is another area which I think will be prominent in our digital future. We did one piece with Übermorgen, Joascha Cruiser, and Leonardo Impet. The next biennial should be curated by a machine. This was a collaboration with the Liverpool Biennial, and the artists trained an AI on the data sets of the Liverpool and Whitney Biennial, and created 64 universes in which this AI which you just see typing out on the screen, is constructing biennials, basically. And those biennials, I'm going to move forward a little bit, consist of fictitious artist biographies. Sometimes all artists have the same first or last name. Sometimes they're mixed up. You will see the AI writing curatorial statements and press releases. So it's basically also a reflection on our curatorial practice. And a work that it will launch later this month is by Devin Kenny, Ongoing Individual Adaptability, or How to Quiet Quit. And in this case, an AI was trained on all of the installation images of the Whitney Museum, interspersed with materials from the archive and ephemera. And what Devin is commenting on here are parallels between authority, control, and collaboration in AI software and art institutions. So here another example of that. And another area that I think will be very prominent is extended reality and VR, of which Tina and Peggy and many others have been working in. So we're in September launching a piece that is a co-commission with KW Kunstwerke in Berlin by Rachel Rossen, The Maw Of, which will be an online piece combined with AR. And there also will be an installation in the Anatomical Museum in Berlin. And as we're talking about futures, I just want to very briefly mention that so essential to these futures is the history. Right now, everybody is obsessed with NFTs and hanging JPEGs on the blockchain, but we're looking at a long history of women in art and of artistic practice, which I explored in my exhibition program, Rules, Codes, and Choreographies in Art, which built connections to conceptual art as well as algorithmically driven moving images. And one part of it was Lynn Hirschman's really pioneering installation, Lorna from 1979, which I think is as relevant today as it has been at the time when it comes to issues of women, which younger artists are now exploring in a different way, but it's almost chilling to see the footage at abortion clinics that is included in this work. So in terms of AI, I also want to just briefly mention an exhibition I did at the Sheila Johnson Design Center about AI work, including, for example, a chatbot by Stephanie Dinkins that was built on 3 generations of African-American women, and work by Mary Flanagan, where she trained the AI exclusively on female painters to then create a kind of origin story for AIs themselves by tasking the AI with painting a portrait of Frankenstein. And Tina and Peggy have also done a terrific exhibition in that space. And I think I'll basically end it here, just pointing to a VR show of mine that is still on tour called Dislocation. This is the 4th edition of DiModa, the Digital Museum of Digital Art, run by Alfredo Salazar Caro. And the exhibition is focused on dislocation in various aspects. On the right, you actually see installation images from Ghazali Art Gallery in London, and it includes works by Ricardo Miranda Zuniga on gentrification on the Lower East Side in New York, as well as a work by Vincent Bowinkle about communication with computers, and a work by Tamiko Thiel on the environment. And I'll stop it here, and hopefully we can further discuss.
Thank you very much, Christiane. That was fantastic. And can you tell us when the next stop is on this tour for the show?
I'm actually not quite sure. I think it's ZKM in Germany in the fall, and another gallery space in the US. Dates to be confirmed.
Well, I'm excited to learn more. Thank you. And yeah, you've collaborated a lot with Tina and Peggy. So Tina, recently you successfully completed your dissertation project, And when I was putting this together, I learned that Christiane is actually your PhD advisor. So that was a really great coincidence. And here we see many parallels and shared research interests, as you too provide a very thorough examination of self-representation and online identity construction from an intersectional lens. Can you tell us more about your research looking at artists who are exploring their self-image online? How does the self-exploration shift across culture? And did any of your participants in your research highlight any geopolitical issues when it comes to their online presence and engagement?
Yeah, well, thank you, Rah, for having me and for the great introduction. And also, of course, thank you, ECC, for having me. Well, I have successfully submitted my PhD thesis. I will defend it in December, on December 1st. It will be online in public. You're all invited. Just let me know if you want to join. And yeah, without the help of my brilliant supervisor, second supervisor, Christiane, I wouldn't have managed to go this far. So yeah, I'm very honored to be with you on the panel today. And thank you also. Well, I will share my screen now and introduce you to performing identities, which is the, no, that's that's not the right part actually. I'm sorry. Why doesn't this work? Let me check. No, it works. Perfect. Well, the online exhibition Performing Identities is the practical part of my PhD thesis with the title Performing Identities, Self-Representation in Art from the Renaissance to Virtual Worlds at the University of Art and Design in Linz, supervised there by Professor Dr. Christa Sommerer, head of the Department of Interface Cultures. And well, in this thesis, I actually investigate the history of digital art until today and the self-representation in digital art. And I explore how the capabilities of the computer and digital tools influence, transform, and expand themes and functions of self-representations. And therefore, I also trace back the themes and functions of the past century of self-representation to, find out to which degree traditional characteristics of artistic self-representation manifest in today's digital age and what new themes and functions have emerged. It's correct that you see the performing identities show correct and not my script, right? Which is awesome. Well, this is the landing page and here you can see the works. The online show now presents the artworks of 19 artists who have worked closely with me in the past years.
We still only see the landing page. I'm not sure if you switched.
No, you see the artists, right? Like Sauerlaender,
just the landing page at this moment.
Yes, that's perfect.
Oh, okay, great.
Yes,
okay.
The landing page. Yeah. Well, so the online show presents 19 artists who have participated and collaborated with me for the last years in a comprehensive study as a part of the dissertation. And all the artists work with self-representation and use digital tools in very different ways. They use photography, video, computer-generated imagery, image editing, 3D scanning and modeling software to recreate their appearance on the other side of the screen. And we all know that these tools, together with the internet and its social platforms, rendered appearance and identity very fluid concepts in general in our society today. Internet users perform identities that may or may not be connected to their self or real life personality. And artists today, they reflect on this kind of social media culture and identity creation. And they also create different versions of themselves, highlight different facets, or create entirely fictionalized identities. With their practice, they question underlying societal values, deal with formal and aesthetics aspects, and facial and bodily depictions. And therefore, of course, artists appropriate the visual language of various online communities and of everyday selfies and post them on the same platform without declaring them as art projects, which means that everyday selfies and the artistic reflection of this culture are visually mostly indistinguishable, blurring the boundaries between art and non-art, which often causes also confusion in the assessment and demarcation of artistic self-representation on social media. Well, the exhibition embraces artists who perform for their camera or other image creation tools like 3D scanners, for example, to generate digital versions of themselves. They stand in the tradition of performance art at the intersection of new media of the 90s, 60s, and 70s, particularly highlighting, or particularly artists like Lynn Hershman-Leeson or Cindy Sherman, when artists actually explored the conditions of new media, like video, for example, in relation to their own bodies, selves, and most of all, in this case, fictionalized or fictional identities. And therefore, also the term identity here accounts for the shift from self-representation towards identity construction, thus implies a multi-perspectival understanding of identities in today's artistic practice. Well, I cannot introduce, to all artists, of course, but according to Rah's question, I want to put an emphasis on artists who explore the performance of identities decidedly in relation to their own cultural or gender background, some of them highlighting geopolitical issues. And I want to start with Avida Biström. So you will have to visit the website performingidentities.net to see the images, to see the whole show, of course. Well, and Avida Biström's exploration of her own body by taking selfies led the artist into questioning female beauty standards. She appears with unshaved pubic area without makeup or showing cellulite. By depicting herself as a nude, the artist highlights her female rights because women artists have historically been excluded from nude studies even until the 20th century, which means that before, the female body was depicted solely by male artists. And Biström often works with mirror selfies and includes her tools in the photo to emphasize her authorship. She's in control of her self-image. Then I want to show you the work of George Jacotai. George Jacotay's self-portraits refer to his own personal struggle with gender and with being a Greek man with feminine long hair and a mustache. He was often bullied online and offline in his own hometown in Greece, for example, for expressing his identity. Further, Jacotay grew up in Greece and was influenced by both Greek and American culture. He experiments with costumes and masks, and over time he started to invent different alter egos and, for example, merged his fascination with American pop singer Lana Del Rey and the meme Pepe the Frog to create his own fictionalized
sorry to
characters.
interrupt you again, but again, we're on the landing page. I think you've switched. We need to switch screens. Or
you don't see the works of the artist?
No, just still on the landing page right now.
But did you see Avida's?
We did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
perfect. Just let me try this again. I'm sorry for this.
Okay.
Do you see George's work now?
Yes, yeah, great.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Oh yes, sorry for this. Thank you for letting me know that you didn't actually see it. Okay. Then what is now happening? then I want to introduce you to the work by Echo Kanluo. Can you see Echo's page now? Perfect.
Yes.
I muted the video actually. So there is, of course, actually sound involved. Yeah, Echo Kanluo's work addresses the possibility of altering the own face with plastic surgery in accordance with a self-image enhanced by a selfie filter. The artist refers to the body dysmorphic disorder caused in the end, or caused in fact by companies, commercial companies who produce these selfie filters that are highly biased, pursuing Western ideals, if you want to say so, and leading.
Just one moment. We're getting only a gray. Oh, there we go. Yeah, there was just a moment where it was only gray. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I'll show you these stills of the other videos. I hope it works better.
Gray screen again. Maybe let's just wait for it to load. I think it might be a loading thing. Yeah, there it is. Okay.
Tina, when you put up your slide or when you put up your notes, it covers the web page. So if maybe there's a way of shifting your screens.
Is it the whole time the case or just now?
Not the whole time. It's just when you open up your
Okay.
open
Okay,
up your
well.
notes, but
Well,
yeah.
okay, well, Echo Kanluo, she discusses this youth culture of being interested in surgery after selfie filters, and also these biases of these filters themselves, actually.
Yeah, I think that's called like a Snapchat dysphoria. Is that the
Yeah, dysmorphia. It's
dysmorphia?
Snapchat.
Yes.
It's called Snapchat dysmorphia. Yes,
Dysmorphia.
or body. It's a kind of a body dysmorphic order. But I didn't highlight Snapchat also because it of course happens to many different platforms where you use selfie filters today, in the Western realm, but also especially in the Asian community. And this is where, which Echo Kanluo highlights. Yeah, and last but not least, I want to introduce you to the work of Rah Eleh. I also muted your film here. I hope you can see it. And well, I can open my notes now, but that's not a problem. So Rah Eleh deals in her works with ethnic performances, and she creates different fictionalized characters. One of them that we see here is Oreo. She is a kind of exaggerated white supremacist. And Rah made different projects for her, for example, an Instagram account called Oreo Live It White. And here we see an excerpt of the video work Supernova from 2018, where Rah performs all the characters we see here. We see Oreo performing, but in this work you will also encounter two other characters, Fatime, which you see behind me. She is performing a neo-orientalist dance and poem, which was written by Rah herself, and also the character Coco. She appears in a black dress and performing under stroboscopic light, moving really fast. And I'll scroll down. We have a picture of her here also, and well, and she represents the overcoming of these constraints of our society today and enters a liminal space beyond any cultural or gender restrictions and constraints. Well, that was it from my side. I'm really sorry for the inconvenience causing by the presentation mode I chose, but thank you so much for listening to my talk.
Thank you so much, Tina. It's such a fascinating project, and I'm honored to be a part of it, and kind of surprised that to be in your presentation today. But it was really great to learn about the other artists, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your defense, and I'm really excited that I got that email today. So congrats, that's exciting. Peggy, you're a collaborator of Tina's and a colleague. You've worked together on so many projects for Peer to Space, and you also work in the area of performance and digital art. Your recent exhibition with Charlie Stein, Portrait of a Future, focused on the depiction of femininity in robotics and the digital age. How do you think these digital technologies are used by artists to subvert or critique gender roles and gender performance?
Thank you so much, Rah, for the invite. It's a really big honor being on this panel with so many great women. I'm going to share my screen briefly. 1 sec. There we go. So I hope you can see it. So yeah, Portrait of a Future was curated by me, as you said, and it showcases the works or the drawings and paintings from the artist Charlie Stein. The exhibition was part of the exhibition series 1-to-1, in which one curator developed one exhibition together with one artist on eye-to-eye level in the virtual exhibition space of the Gallery Presca Pasquer. And Charlie, in general, her works exaggerate, sorry for that, supposedly feminine characteristics in her works by shaping seemingly stereotypes of robotic women. But actually, if you take a closer look and deal with the use of these robots or applications, she is kind of like transforming into human shapes. It actually becomes clear that they do not do the work they are supposed to do by having a break, for instance, hanging out with other robots, or by not being the carrying application that is supposed to be, for instance. So these depictions Charlie Stein is showing within the exhibition and in her work in general set themselves free from this robotic slavery in a certain way. So her work in general already followed a gender critique that was part of the exhibition Portrait of a Future. Here you can see the island or the virtual gallery, which is on the open source platform Mozilla Hubs, which we created, or Mohsen Hasrati actually created the virtual art space. What should be mentioned is that the building we can see on the main island is actually a kind of reproduction of the former gallery space in the physical. She had before, it's actually the upper floor of the gallery, and Mohsen just recreated it, building a space that is recognizable for the user that are not so used to these new technologies or media, or especially to the virtual realm for being part of an art exhibition. So what was important for us in the exhibition, so important for us, Charlie and me, is that we wanted to work with the potential of the virtual space, also in relation to her work. So it was about translating her physical drawings and paintings into digital artworks and applying these to the virtual conditions of the gallery, which means that we, on the one hand, sized up the works to an appropriate size. As you can see, the paintings and drawings you can see on the slide are quite big. In real life, they are actually quite small, about DNA 4. So that was definitely a decision to size them up, which was also a bit tricky for the artist, or like unusual, let's say unusual, as she wasn't sure if that is actually working when it comes to the quality of the image and also to the artwork itself. So it was also about working within the virtual realm. It was also about playing with dimension and using the potential that the artwork itself is not bound to its dimension, but can be adapted to different kinds of situations. On the other hand, what we did was that we created sculptures out of her depictions of female robots, which were placed like erratic blocks or flats at the beach of the gallery. And that was especially interesting as this, of course, changed the approach and also the way of perceptions of her conceptual artworks that are mainly bound to drawings and paintings. So what happened was that the robotic figures actually appear more human-like. and that changed the way how you interacted and also get in contact with the artworks, or in that case, the sculptures. And as Charlie Stein developed a stereotyped appearance of robotic applications that are ascribed as female, and this cliche of women actually becomes more graspable for the user. And also within this experience, it kind of like underlines this appearance of, or this way of describing, or ascribing also gender to different applications. When we think about Alexa, for instance, or the carrying robot Grace. So as soon as there is a special kind of need needed, it comes to gender or classical gender roles. And by creating this human-like appearances and by making it more visible and underlining it, this aspect actually becomes topic itself. And another thing I would like you to show you is that what we also did, talking about the potential of the virtual, that we placed some of her drawings, which we duplicated within the water. So when you took a walk at the beach, you've seen different drawings floating on the sea. And that, of course, is also something that you wouldn't do in real life, as at some point the drawings would sink to the bottom. And of course, you would also destroy the artwork. And if that's not part of the concept or the artwork itself, which is not the case in Charlie's work, then you, of course, destroy it. And that's not, that's not what it's meant to be. So working within the virtual realm, or also translating artworks from the physical to the virtual or digital, gives you opportunities or possibilities to change the way of approach as well as the way of percepting the artworks. And as you also, coming to an end, I just want to briefly mention this, as you've also been talking about performances. What was really interesting during the exhibition was observing users watching the exhibition or going through the exhibition. And it kind of like became a performance itself. And that's actually also an interesting aspect for performance art, as the work with the body completely changes. As you on the one hand get disembodied, at the same time you experience your body differently, especially when it comes to translating your movements with, for instance, motion tracking. So bound to the interfaces, it changes the way of expressing your body work, but also of experiencing it. And at that point, and that was also part within the virtual exhibition, is that the user actually itself becomes part of the performance as well as of the experience, of course, as it's all bound to the visitor, especially when it comes to virtual reality, is like carrying the headset, etc. So to answer your question, a kind of like a summary. So digital media allows a different kind of way of dealing with topics such as gender or performance, and to practice in that way a certain kind of should also be mentioned is that in art history in general, new media always has been used by women to criticize gender role. When we think about video art, for instance, in its very beginning, it was a way of opening up a sphere that was in between the public and the private, giving artists, women artists, a possibility to express themselves, and also occupying a space that is not connotated, or that not already has a level of reflection. So it gave them a kind of like empty space, safe space, that they were able to create and occupy with their meanings they wanted to have. So, and of course this changes when we talk about video. It's not like that as it was in the 50s or 60s anymore. So we will probably observe the same when it comes to virtual art or virtual reality art, augmented reality. But what we can see is, and that's also a potential of new media, especially when it comes to gender questions, is that traditions of the arts, such as performance, such as interaction, immersion, etc., I find a new way of expression and of application within the arts, and that's actually a great potential that creates a new and contemporary approach to topics of our time. And that's it from my side. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Peggy. And I would have to agree, yes, since even the introduction of the Kodak Brownie, which made the camera really accessible, or the Portapak, which again, it was more accessible technology. Women, people of color had access to these technologies, which prior to, the daguerreotype, for example, was so expensive and only reserved for an elite community. So yeah, I think access is definitely once these women do have access. And I appreciate what you're saying about safe space too, because we see a lot of these works, especially in early feminist art and practice, it's happening in their private homes. It's happening in their private space where they have space to reflect and to be, there's an intimacy with the camera. Anyway, I thank you. And I was going to bring in Julie, but now I'm thinking Francesca, because Francesca does these incredible Mozilla Hubs tours. She did one for a performance, ECC performance art, and I love Mozilla Hubs as a tool for my students, because we can be online on Zoom and we can go and explore all of these exciting galleries and spaces. And so Francesca, let's go to you. Your research as a historian and practice as a technologist introduces a lot of cutting edge and innovative modes of visualizing, publishing, and information capture. And you've developed digital tools for the Getty Scholars Workspace TM for arts research and preservation. In your opinion, what are some of the major challenges for archiving, preserving digital art like XR, software art, data? Who is responsible for the development of these archival infrastructures?
Yeah, great question. And thank you so much for having me. It's really good to be here with you all. I get a lot of these questions at the Office of Advanced Research Computing at UCLA, where I work, and I work with faculty researchers across campus on their digital research needs, but also when I work with faculty out of design media arts or theater, film, and digital media. We're thinking about how do we preserve these works long term. So in terms of your question, right, are there challenges? Yes, there are so many challenges, but I'm just going to name a few today. In terms of the XR spectrum, I'll mostly focus on 3D data, but this can really apply to all kinds of XR related data, including 360 capture. For a broader sort of look at preservation and digital media, I would refer you to Abby Smith-Rumsey's book from 2016. It's a phenomenal resource on that. But just a few specifics. First and foremost, changing formats and workflows with this kind of material, it's a huge challenge. There's many different kinds of data related to 3D and XR work, and many different methods for creating it. So, there's reality-based models that use photogrammetry or scanned volumetric models, scanned surface models, digital terrain models. All of these things get brought into environments together too. So things like procedural algorithmic models, we've talked a lot about code being used to generate particular kinds of works, right? Then born digital sources, so things that are modeled by hand. These could be virtual worlds, Mozilla Hubs, like you discussed, right? Bringing different kinds of elements together within a virtual space. And also games, right? Games have particular interactions, programs that are designed to allow people to have certain achievements. They have a lot going on in terms of interaction. So the point here is that for preservation, there's no one size that fits all, right? There's a difficulty for creating interoperability too across these various different kinds of platforms and softwares and hardwares. Some companies are beginning to think through this. Adobe in particular is starting to think of how do we make this process easier, whether you're exporting to augmented reality or to virtual reality? How do you start with a modeling software and work all the way through that process, being able to export from one sort of platform to another, one sort of software to another, making that easier. But it really is a complicated process. Along those lines too, then is storage space or storage long-term, right? And hardware maintenance. So XR files are often really heavy, meaning that they're big files, and it's an investment in terms of what we can store long-term. This means we often find ourselves being really picky in what we save. So when cataloging XR work, which files do you choose to save? This is along the lines of, if we were looking at Picasso, right? His study drawings versus his final masterpiece. What are the various components along the way that we think are essential to understanding the work historically, long-term? What related information do you choose to save in order to have that in the archive? So details of construction, workflow, intended interaction, maintenance, collaboration, various different kinds of versions, obviously, so on and so forth. This can go on for a long time, and that's why it's really complex when we're looking at extended reality technologies for the archive. We also have to think about things like forward migration. These formats change over time. 3D is notorious for this. You could store something as, OBJ is currently one of the most popular formats, but there may be something else down the line. TVs are also becoming more popular. So depending on the platforms of the day, these file types are going to change, and librarians are going to have to keep, and special collections and archivists are going to have to keep up with that sort of forward migration of these files. And also the hardware, right? So we need emulators to recreate recreate sort of interactions when different hardwares are no longer accessible, or we can't plug them in and use them anymore. So how do we think about creating emulators for that interaction, recreating that interaction to bring these works back years later? So in terms of access, long-term preservation, I subscribe to the LOCKSS method. Librarians will say this all the time. LOCKSS stands for lots of copies keep stuff safe. It's a very clever little acronym, but it's the truth, right? So basic, we need things like the final version of the 3D model. We need the final texture maps, material files, palettes, shadow maps, stable versions of the software, metadata and paradata related to the project, the real-time environment, so the final aggregated binary files, if there's code involved, and then for spatial projects, right, things like camera locations and GIS coordinates, things of that nature. But if we want to treat XR art like we treat other works in the archive, there are so many more related materials we would want for preservation, like correspondence related to the project, publicity and marketing materials, data describing project decisions and changes over time, various iterations of the work in progress. So this is, again, it's a complicated thing here. Ultimately, the question is, what do you want people to be able to do with the preserved files? That is going to drive a lot of what gets kept. Do you want them to recreate the experience exactly or just be able to view what it was like? Does your work have sort of particulars to it, like spatial annotations or text? And maybe that needs to be stored separately as text files so that people can analyze those separately long-term. Maybe they have a better chance of preservation if we do something like that. Each project will have its own needs along those lines. And then another ongoing issue is obviously proprietary versus open source software. Creatives are well-versed in this, they understand it. This is just a few different software types for object viewers as an example, let alone the whole XR spectrum of various kinds of headset hardware and their own app stores. But they all have their own systems for managing file types, and they don't all allow sort of interoperability. They don't follow the same schemas or standards. So this is a bit of a nightmare when it comes to preservation. Most proprietary software companies are only thinking of what's useful for them. Sketchfab is sort of one exception. They do pride themselves in holding regular meetings with invested communities like museums and cultural heritage institutions and scholars, and they do try to be responsive. But like others, for example, Google discontinued the support of Poly, which was a repository for 3D models and environments. And many creatives had invested time and energy in bringing their work to that platform because of their free services. So it's, you know, and educators as well, it's really a setback to have these things disappear on you. So right now, Mozilla Hubs is on the rise. I'm a big fan of it. I use it in my own work as the director of the Digital Art History Journal Gallery, but it's connected to Amazon Web Services. So, you know, we have to keep those things in mind when we're thinking of long-term preservation. Their licenses are also going to be designed to protect them. So creatives really need to be conscious about what certain platforms can claim in terms of software and the distributing platforms and how that might affect the long-term stability of a work. Open source communities obviously can be great, but can also be slower to keep up with innovation and lose their momentum over time. So just to answer your final bit of your question, which is who's responsible, just before that, I'm just going to say, obviously, we all we hate to admit it, but sometimes we have to learn to let things go. So digital things have their own life cycle too. Sometimes we have to just acknowledge that they're not immune to the sands of time. And, you know, things like screen recordings and images are still going to be your best bet in terms of long-term preservation. And then obviously who's responsible? Artists have to be mindful of the archive. So save and document what you think is most important about your work. Curators and scholars can help with that documentation of various kinds, but institutional support is essential. And that goes for all GLAM institutions, so galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And that's not just in terms of labor, but in terms of, you know, financial funding as well. Our digital footprint is exponentially increasing, as you all know. So this is, I see it less a librarian archivist's job to deal with and more a digital infrastructure issue going long term. But there are people who are working on it. We just had a book that I participated in writing a chapter for come out from the community standards for 3D preservation. There are obviously accessibility issues for this work long term, but also you can get involved in things like the interoperability image framework. They have a 3D group that's thinking about this type of stuff. So, you know, it's, like I said, it's a complicated issue, but there is hope and there are a lot of people working on it.
Thank you so much, Francesca. You've given us so much to mull over, and I know the topic of archiving, I mean, Christiane did an incredible talk about that too. This could be its own panel. So you've just given us so much in 10 minutes, and I always appreciate how many resources and you bring into your presentations. There's always just so much knowledge and awareness about what is happening in the community. So that's really exciting. Okay, next up we have, and last but not least, we have Julie. Hi, Julie. Oh.
Sorry, it's just I'm having some technical difficulties, of course, but I shouldn't because I'm in Toronto, but you can see me now.
I see you, and I have I guess my question for you is, you know, you're curating over 150 artists for Nuit Blanche Toronto, a very ambitious task. Many of your artists are adapting their works to AR and XR, VR, and large immersive video installations. What are the biggest challenges you're seeing in curating digital art at the moment, especially in the context of Nuit, where you are putting artworks and artists from around the world in conversation? And what are some of the common themes and strategies that you've observed that are being used by your artists when working with this XR technology?
All good questions. I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer all of them. I'm going to.
It's a lot. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like each question could be its own panel, but of course,
No, I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna kind of start at the beginning, and I'm just gonna start talking through some of those kind of concepts. And so, like, you know, the project doesn't come out of nowhere, and so it's not the first time that I'd be working or as a practicing artist in digital media myself. So I feel like there's a few things. One, myself and Dr. Taunton and Dr. Gugliorte did a publication called Indigenous Art, New Media and the Public, or Public and the New Media, or I can't remember the title, but it's from 2016. And it was the first peer-reviewed international journal on Indigenous digital media. And then a year later, I organized the Futures Indigenous, or the Future Imaginary, where we had about 45 speakers from Australia, New Zealand, Finland, Norway, United States, etc., to talk through these kind of critical concepts. And a lot of it was around media and design, also around kind of spatial or geographic locations and those kind of contemplations there. Next up is, I'm going to talk a little bit about, because I think it's important, and it kind of then goes into some of the questions specifically around Nuit Blanche, is we've been really successful. Myself, we actually are called the Glam Collective. Partly it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke because we like to drink wine and look nice, and you know, and so we're kind of glammy, but at the same time very pragmatic, and we work in galleries like libraries, archives, and museums. And so we've done these really great things, which is called, like, we do a kind of makerspace incubator where we gather anywhere between 6 to 9 artists. We kind of put them in a room for a week to 10 days. We look at emerging, established, and mid-career. We always have kind of local artists and then artists from different areas, depending. And so usually we see what they can do, and we give them a bunch of tools to digital media. And what's exciting about this is it's kind of transformative, because we primarily work with people who have had little or no experience with digital media, and then introduce them, some people working in printmaking or beading or tufting, sewing, older kinds of medias is what I would argue, or older kinds of new media. And so we like to kind of see that kind of shift and change. And so usually with those incubators, we have an event. The image that you see is from Art in the Open, where we had, I think, 6 artists, maybe it was 9 for that one. Anyways, come and kind of take over that space, and then do a public installation from the work. And so these have been really fun, and they've led into different kinds of projects, one being Nuit Blanche. And so what's exciting about Nuit Blanche is that I've been tasked with going citywide. So Nuit Blanche is already the largest public exhibition in North America, and now we need to go to the entire larger Toronto area, which is, it has never been done yet. And so just what Rah said, we've got 150 artists, and you know, there's some other aspects to that. So in 2020, I curated or was the artistic director for the first ever kind of virtual event. You know, we did 23 AR VR works, which Rah was one of those artists. We did a 6-hour live stream with kind of digital renderings, algorithms around the archive. So there was like kind of a created algorithm from the kind of archival information that we had from the last 15 years. We also had, you know, curated DJs and kind of like pieces, snippets from Nuit Talks and Nuit podcasts. And so we're going to try to continue some of that. So we're going to bring back some of those AR and VR works. We've got about 15 new works around augmented and virtual reality. We have lots of installation-based work that also includes AR or VR as a component. So some of the things I think that are kind of important to note for Nuit, it actually generates about $45 million in economic impact each year. It draws about 1.2 million people out for a 12-hour period. The 2020 event that I did, we featured over 50 BIPOC artists. It was the first large-scale augmented reality work for a major city festival. And we also produced a comprehensive 14-year archive. On top of that, we did talks, podcasts. I didn't sleep very well, I guess, leading up to that, but the other part that Nuit Blanche is part of is the Space Between Us, which is a larger partnership grant. So in Canada, we have specific grants that are geared towards kind of long-term partnership engagement. And actually, Francesca, your university is included in that, because Mashana Goman was or is still at UCLA. I know there's some transition there. And so, so we have 31 partners and we cover 9 different territories. It's connections between North America, the Pacific, and the Circumpolar. It looks specifically at digital media and public art, of how those kind of questions can rupture public space, and how those mediums can be decolonial tools to kind of shift or translate the kind of colonial dialogue that's been happening in those spaces. This is part of the project around Nuit Blanche. And so, you know, we're going to have a symposium. We just finished the first book for Nuit Blanche, and, you know, obviously the exhibition. So I'm going to skip that part. One other part I would say is that we did an Indigenous delegation to MIT. And so we were supposed to do it in person. We ended up doing it entirely virtually, but we looked and met with over 50 MIT faculty, fellows, scientists, everybody in the gamut. And then we paired up different Indigenous makers, scholars, and critical thinkers for that event. And it was a really kind of incredible exchange. And again, kind of a different kind of incubator, but still kind of generative of new work. Do I talk about the lab? I feel like I'll mention the lab. I think it's important. I feel like the kind of culmination of the work that I'm talking about specifically around maker spaces, collaboration, digital media, came out of doing the kind of research around looking at the methodologies of how people come together. Do they collaborate? Is there informal mentorship and exchange of knowledge? Is there reciprocal actions that are happening? Are artists learning from each other? And so with that, I mean, the short answer is yes, all those things are happening. And so maybe a year and a half ago, I just finished building a 5,000 square foot lab at the University of Winnipeg, where it's kind of an interactive space where it can kind of be transformative. It's got green screen and soundproofing and motion activation and 3D printers, laser cutters. I feel like I'm probably forgetting some stuff. Obviously, some really great hardware. The project that we just finished producing, it was really interesting hearing you, Francesca, talking about how to preserve it. I was like, we just finished a 360 project. And so this, I'd say, has been one of the most challenging projects that I've done to date, and partly because nobody had done it, you know, in the way that we were trying to do it. It's a partnership with the Sami Film Institute and the Sami Pavilion in Venice. And so we commissioned and created and produced 6 new works that are all going to be done in 360 round with 9.1 kind of sound system. And it's been a really kind of interesting challenge in that, you know, some people are shooting in 24K, some people are shooting in 8K. And so there were lots of kind of ways of learning. And so we just finished the project, and this was part of a 6-month incubator with these 6 artists specifically who were making 360s work. But then we had another incubator, which the 2 merged or interacted with myself and Dr. Heather Gugliorte. And so the other incubator was specifically 7 emerging circumpolar artists who had basically never worked in digital technology before. And they made screen-based work and AR works that we just showcased at Whitehorse at the Arctic Art Summit. And so the feedback has been really fantastic. I think some of the questions that I think I would ask or like kind of contemplate are, you know, how do you share those works? You know, how do they become acquisitions or not? How does other kind of curators engage with that? One of, I think, the biggest challenges with the 2020 virtual event was, you know, even though we had 400,000 people look at the work, it still wasn't enough compared to the 1.2 million that come out for the 12-hour period. And so that kind of roadblock or lack of digital literacy really hurt the kind of like transmission that could have been possible. And so now it's been really interesting over the last 2 years of just seeing the full flip, people being really engaged, wanting to create augmented and virtual reality and kind of like immersive experimental, you know, and it's been great, but it's also, it's moving so quickly that I think that literacy still needs to kind of catch up, and more people need to figure out how to engage. And then, as you already mentioned, then how do we preserve that, and what does that look like? Is it experiential? Is it just to know that it existed? You know, and those are all lots of questions that I think that will be really interesting into the future. I don't know, I think I feel like I'm gonna stop there. I feel like, because we don't have much time. And so thanks so much, Rah, for having me, and really great to get to meet everybody. It's nice to be part of this fierce panel. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Wow, I'm so excited for Nuit Blanche and for us to experience it in real life. But I did love the virtual experience during COVID, and to be able to just explore the city with all these AR, the links that you could just download and put the artworks everywhere. It was a really nice thing to do during such a tight lockdown for us, especially in Toronto. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. I feel like I want like a panel to do this again, because there's just so much more to say. Some of you have touched on it, but maybe I'll just ask one final question, because I know we're just going over time now. What are the most urgent and pressing issues that we must address to face the future of our sector effectively, and any critical changes that you want to bring up, or any exciting projects you want to mention? Many of you already have, that you haven't had an opportunity to mention before we say goodbye.
I'll get started and just jump in with a few quick comments, which already came up in my presentation. I think ethic and bias in softwares, particularly as we're dealing with a lot more AI, and also representation and inclusion, thinking about the important work that Tina and Peggy and Julie have done in that area will be really challenging. Our world gets more and more automated and driven by systems, and at the same time, we are far away from having the framework, or the equity in framework to power all of it. So I think those will be major challenges in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christiane.
Maybe I can just jump in. I couldn't agree more to what Christiane just said. And besides that, what I think is also really important, especially for the work of curating VR or XR exhibitions, is also talking about media competence and conveying media competence, educating it at schools, universities, etc. Because what I observe often is that especially the younger generation uses media or new technology is quite kind of like easygoing, but they don't really consciously know what they're doing and consciously know how they interact with these new technologies and what happens actually in the background, which also relates to what Christiane just said, becoming conscious about how these applications are constructed and built. And that it's not something objective or neutral, but there's always a certain kind of spirit or mind behind these processes that also shape these technologies. So yeah.
Thank you, Peggy.
I would just also add to that, physical accessibility, making these technologies available to people who have disabilities. When we're thinking of long-term preservation, I think companies are becoming more aware, but I think that that's still going to be a long-term issue moving forward. But also the environmental impact of just data storage long-term. I think this is a grand global problem in terms of data infrastructure, and particularly around artists and their work. When we compress things in order to store them, we sacrifice some of the work and the authenticity of the work, or the clarity of the work. And so these are going to be challenges that I think we're going to have to figure out. It's a financial burden, it's an environmental burden. We've talked about this in terms of blockchain, Rah, you and I. I think it's improving, people are aware of it, but it is going to be a long-term sort of issue that we have to figure out.
Absolutely. All right, so any final thoughts? Okay, well, we are, time flies when you're in good company. Thank you so much for this talk. I know it was so short, and everyone's work and research deserves its own, hour. But I'm so grateful, and I just want to let our attendees know that you can see a recording of this chat, it'll be on the ECC Italy Biennial website. It will also be online at the Aabijijiwan Media Art Lab as well. And thank you, Julie, and your lab for hosting the webinar. I really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for, joining us for this hour, and yeah, we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you
Thanks
so
so much,
much,
everyone.
Thank you so
Annette.
much.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.